Well, the busy month of December continues here for the Cavaliers. The Wine and Gold with another back-to-back coming up this weekend. We break down another week here in Cavaliers basketball coming up on the Cavs Insider Podcast. Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on the Cavs Insider Podcast. John Rutter, Spencer German, getting you ready for another busy weekend of Cavaliers basketball, and that has been the theme, a busy December here for the Wine and Gold. 10 games at home for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and when it's all said and done here at the end of the month, most of the home schedule will be done, but the Cavs and playing at home, a good place to play, coming off a couple of road games here this week, one win, one loss. Spence, I guess we'll start there. Disappointing effort, not necessarily effort on against the Sacramento Kings, but a disappointing loss there to the Spurs, rather. Kings, Spurs, that's where my mind is at. But a disappointing loss there to the Spurs, but you come back and you get a good win against Luka Doncic and a good Dallas Mavericks team. How are you feeling about things as you head into another busy weekend here?
Well, real quick, John, I was going to say, you mentioned it being a busy month for the Cavs. I think it's just a busy month for everyone. I know me and you included. We've tried multiple times to kind of link up and do one of these, but with your work schedule, it's
difficult to carve 20 minutes out for a podcast. You're like really cramming and jamming here.
Yeah, between your work schedule, my work schedule, it's just been a little nuts. But we're glad to be back and sort of catch up with you guys a little bit. You bring up the Kings, and I'll go back there real quick because I think. I don't want to I still felt like that was a game the Cavs should have won.
Sure, yeah.
Both Kings games, if we're being honest. But I do think that it's not necessarily one of those games that you look at and say, like, oh, man, like, how do you get swept by the Kings? Because I think this is a different Kings team this year. So that was a fluky sort of at-home loss. Seemed like the effort just kind of was blah in that one. But they kind of rebounded, got the win against Oklahoma City to kind of wrap up that short homestand. And that was nice. The San Antonio loss, though, that one felt like, you talk about losses that make you go like, wince a little bit, not really sure. That was one of them because, I know San Antonio was on a little bit of a win streak with that win now factored in, included. But that is a team that their sole purpose at this point is to tank for, what is it, Wembanyama, the guy who's coming out. I don't know if I said that right, but that is their sort of goal and focus at this point. So to lose to that team, I know it's on the road and the Cavs have sort of struggled on the road. That was a disappointing one. That felt like one that they should have had. You get the win over Dallas to sort of salvage the quick road trip there, which was nice. And that was maybe, I think JB talked about this after the game too, but that was maybe like the most complete game that this team has played all season, at least on the road, if not all season, because from start to finish, they led. Offense was really rolling and clicking. They kind of had things figured out. Donovan Mitchell was great, and the defensive effort was incredible against one of the best players in the NBA, and Luka Doncic. So that it was nice to get that one and sort of salvage things. But I don't know, that San Antonio loss just kind of feels like one that has still kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And we'll see as they return home now. Very long road stand here. They get, I think, 6 games in a row at home. We'll see how that maybe propels them. The win over Dallas sort of propels them into that stretch, which this home stretch, John, ends with a game against Brooklyn, and that's starting to look like a huge game as they're sort of now right in the mix there at the top of the East and have gained plenty of ground and are right below the Cavs in the standings. So it's going to be an important stretch coming up here at home.
Yeah, and it's a good opportunity for the Cavs to maybe rattle off some wins and continue some of that home success that we've seen so far this season, and a good maybe opportunity for them to kind of get some points in the bag, or some wins in the bag, rather. Donovan Mitchell, 28 points against the Spurs, and followed it up with, I believe, 34 points against the Dallas Mavericks on Wednesday night. Another 30-point effort for him. Seems like we talk about Jarrett Allen being like the walking double-double. Donovan Mitchell is like your walking 30-point night, it seems like. Yeah. But another big game in terms of minutes for him. Early on in the season, when there were a lot of guys out of the lineup, we kind of looked at those minutes and thought, okay, well, JB's kind of using the big gun that they acquired in the offseason to kind of augment any offense that they might be needing in the absence of Garland, in the absence of some of the other guys that missed some time early on in the season. Are the high minute totals kind of concerning for you as we venture through December?
I think so. And again, I know I kind of keep going back to the cliche of it's early in the season, so I'm not freaking out yet. And I still stand by that for the most part in this instance, because listen, like January, February is where things really start picking up and we all start getting more sort of in tune with what's happening with the Cavs. I think more casual fans start sort of watching more and starting to kind of get a feel for this team leading into the later months of the season. And then obviously the postseason, which we all hope the Cavs are there. But yeah, I'm concerned in the sense that, like, I get early in the season why they were banking on him so much. Garland got hurt. He wasn't in the lineup anymore, and he kind of had to be the focal point of your offense. I'm plain and simple. So I understood the usage then. Now that you're hopefully at a point late December where you're starting to kind of figure things out and figure out what rotations work. And I get there's still some kinks that are being ironed out by JB Bickerstaff. I mean, we're seeing sort of a revolving door at the 3. Lamar Stevens had his best game of the season the other night in Dallas. He's kind of come into that position a little bit. I think ideally they want Dean Wade maybe there, but Dean Wade's obviously been dealing with some injuries. So I as they kind of iron some of that out, like, I don't love the idea of Mitchell being used this much early in the season. When you want to see that is down the stretch of a season. I think he's just under 40. He's at like 30, just under 37 minutes. I think he's at for the season, something like that. But it just feels like so much is on his shoulders. And the point of getting him wasn't to have to put all the brunt of that work on like one guy. Like, the hope was that you were kind of spreading things out and sharing the wealth a little bit. And this actually kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about, because I do think Darius Garland has the green light to shoot, which fine. Like, we get it. He was great last year. He kind of was that Donovan Mitchell role right now last year where, down the stretch of the season, there was a lot of injuries. Everything was going through him. He kind of had to be that guy. But this year it feels like he has the green light. And I think at times it almost becomes a detriment to the Cavs because late in games, he's shooting a lot and missing, or he's just having an off night, or he's not knocking them down. And he's kind of been a little bit more streaky than he was late last year. And that's almost becoming an issue, I think, for this team. So it's not that I want to say Darius shouldn't shoot, because sure, I think him and Garland are the main two pieces of the offense for sure. But I just think in certain situations, almost, I wonder if he should be conceding to Mitchell. And I wonder where the awareness is sometimes of like who's having the off night, who's having the on night, if Garland kind of needs to pick up on that a little bit. And that's not to say like he should be shy about shooting, because I don't want him to then develop this habit of like, I can't shoot, I'm scared, or I don't want to take that shot. He should be able to do that. I just think like I'm a little worried about where he kind of fits in certain moments in games when he's just not knocking him down. He's only taken, I think, like maybe 2 more shots than he did last year. So it's not like he's like shooting immensely more than he did a year ago. But again, back to my point on Mitchell, right? Like you got him with the idea that it wasn't going to be all on him. He wasn't going to have to play up to 40 minutes. And the same sort of thing I think applies for Garland, where it's like, maybe you don't have to take as many shots as you did last year because you have other guys to rely on. And I do think they need to involve Mobley and Allen maybe a little bit more offensively at times too.
Yeah, as the great Jason Lloyd said, when you acquire a guy like Donovan Mitchell, he is essentially your closer. He said there are 2 closers in this town, Emmanuel Clase and Donovan Mitchell. I think that they maybe do expect Mitchell to kind of be more of that closer role, but not necessarily have to shoulder the burden for a full 48 minutes.
Yeah.
And, with regards to Darius, I don't know if maybe the eye is maybe still some lingering effects there.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I think that we were all maybe easy to dismiss how easy it was to come back from an injury like that and how scary that was. And look, he's been hit in the face a couple more times since then. And he said, like, look, this is kind of annoying. Like, I'm tired of getting hit in the face. It's something that I think it's something that he might even be thinking about. So when you have that going through your mind, that could potentially cause some issues with your rhythm and your shot and who knows what else. But he's been hit in the face, he's been hit in the eye a couple more times. I also think that it might have been a little too quick to maybe pronounce or declare that, hey, they've figured out the kinks at the end of games, right? They've figured out how they're closing things out. They've talked about how they're kind of navigating this process of closing games out, who's going to get shots, what sets they like, what actions they like to run with whatever personnel they have. And after they kind of righted that losing streak that they had at the at the onset of the season and rattled off a few wins, specifically at home, I think that maybe we anointed them like, okay, they figured it out. We're going to be good to go. And this is still an 82 game slog. There's still going to be ebbs and flows of this as they try to navigate that process.
I was going to say, maybe should Garland just adopt the face mask like full time?
He has said, like, look, someone's got to get me some goggles. Someone's got to get me a face mask. And I know that he kind of opted against that when he came back from his injury. He wasn't going to wear any sort of protective equipment. Said that he didn't want to have to worry about anything like that. But I mean, there's been 2-3 instances that I can think of just off the top of my head where he's kind of gotten, hit in the face. Jared Allen went down. Like, I don't recall a season where I've seen so many people hit in the face. I think Donovan Mitchell even got hit in the face one game. Like, I don't know if it's just something that we're maybe hypersensitive to after seeing the injury that he had, or, that teams are maybe trying to be a little bit more aggressive on their closeouts towards him, knowing that this could be potentially something that he's thinking of. But it is a really weird situation to see how he has navigated or continued to come back from that injury. That was a scary one. He seems to make light out of it. He was talking about it at one of the last media scrums that I was involved with him in. He also had his chips with him too. So if you have a chance to check out the Crunchland chips, I know that we were going to try to have a taste test on one of those, but
I'm so disappointed, man.
His personality is still there, that's for sure.
John and I hyped up the chip. We kept texting back and forth. We're like, next time we do a pod, we got to sample these chips. We'll give a peek behind the curtain to the viewers here. And I was like so ready to do it for this episode. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna stop behind and get these chips. And then literally the Heinen's I went to a Heinen's earlier in the week, and they had the barbecue ones, and I was like, all right, I don't need to get them now though, because I can get them later. Like, it's fine. And so then the morning before, as we're doing this podcast, I was like, oh, I'm going to stop at Heinen's and get these chips finally. And all they had left was salt and vinegar at the Heinen's I went to. And I'm just telling everybody right now, no offense to anybody who's a salt and vinegar chip fan, I despise salt and vinegar chips. So I was like, I can't do it. I'm not going to taste test the worst version of the chip because I'm going to hate it. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Garland's chips. They're going to be terrible because I hate salt and vinegar. It's going to get like a 3.
I was asking a bunch of questions to, I think, Chris Fedor and Kelsey Russo after, like, Garland sitting there in his media conference with the chips on the lap. I think Serena Winters was like, I feel like I have to ask you about the chips, and then like crunched on one right there in the media scrum. But then I started asking questions to like some of the guys in the media, like, well, like, how many flavors does he have? Does he only have the 3? Like, what's are they kettle cooked? And finally, I think Chris was like, maybe you should ask this in the media scrum when he had the chance to actually ask him.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it sounded like they were pretty good. I know a couple people who had them and tried them, I think, in town, but I unfortunately didn't get a chance. I wanted generally just the sea salt ones. I think it's this, like, you have the standard chip flavor and it's that one, but the barbecue would have been fine. And I ended up getting stuck with only having the option of salt and vinegar, which was not ideal. So, but anyway, I was going to say that, you bring up that we thought maybe they had finally sort of ironed out some of that stuff after they rattled off a few wins at the long losing streak there. And I understand why maybe we wanted to jump the gun on that a little bit. But I also wonder, as we get close to sort of the end of the calendar year and turn the page towards, it's not really the home stretch because there's still so much of the season to go, but the part of the calendar where we start paying attention a little bit more, fans start paying attention a little bit more, and the games feel like they matter more. What are your goals for this team at this point? Because I mean, I've thrown out there, I'll just admit it, I threw out as a hot take on 92.3 that I thought this team is going to get to the conference finals, because it feels like, I mean, think about it. We didn't think the Hawks were going to do that a couple of years ago, and then they went on a great run. They did it. And I think this team certainly has the talent to be able to do that as they continue to figure out what rotation works. Maybe they make a deal at the deadline and they add somebody, and that helps kind of the process here, and then we feel even better about those possibilities. I still think that's a realistic possibility for them. Yes. But I think as excited as I was when this season started, where I was like, man, the Cavs are back. I can't wait for this season. I'm going to follow along. And I generally have watched almost like every game, if not like bits and pieces of every game. And I'm so in tune with this year, but I'm also starting to sort of temper my expectations a little bit where I'm like, all right, if they don't get to the conference finals, I have to be okay with that. I know I want that, and I want that to be my hot take that makes it so I can rub it in everybody's face, but I have to like understand where I'm at. And I think for me, John, I'm at a point right now where I think like hosting a first round game, that's where I want, like our first round series, that's where I want them to be. I want them to be out of the play-in. I don't want them to be going on the road, especially, I mean, heck, with the road struggles they've had this year, nobody wants to see them go on the road for more games than they would be at home. So those top 4 seeds where you are at home hosting a playoff series, I think that is the window that I'm kind of looking at and saying if they can be in there, and maybe they get jumped by Brooklyn in a couple weeks here, we'll see. But like if they're in that window, then I think I'm okay with that, and hopefully that means success in the postseason and they can go a little further. But I at least want that for this group.
I'm right there with you, and I'm looking at the standings right now. They're currently in the 3 seed, one spot ahead of Brooklyn, as you just mentioned. But like I think that's a realistic possibility for them to kind of be. And I was talking about this with someone the other night. Like, look, this is potentially a 4 seed. Like I think that's kind of a reasonable expectation. I don't necessarily think that they're going to compete at the top of the conference with a Boston or a Milwaukee all season long. But after that, I think that it's kind of fair game to lump them in there with the Brooklyn, with the Philadelphia. I think that when you talk about some of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, the list kind of starts to get shorter, and you start to insert the Cavaliers in that conversation when you go down the run of teams that are at the top of the standing. So I certainly think that we've advanced past the play-in team. Like I don't think that's going to be something that's in the conversation this year. I think that they're certainly going to be one of those top 4 seeds. And if there are have any wits about them, I think that's something that they also kind of take into account, right? Like this team knows that they play well at home. They're very cognizant of that. They talk about that a lot in some of their comments. They talk about the crowd and how they feed off of that, and how they just generally are a better basketball team and more difficult to play against at home. So I think that's something that they will absolutely take into account when playing for if you have a playoff spot already wrapped up. If you're playing for seeding, that's something that we're going to have to keep our eyes on because, at this point in the season, I think most of the teams that are already in a playoff spot are probably going to keep that moving forward here into the new year and as the rest of the year kind of transpires. But you're essentially kind of playing for seeding and seeing who is going to finally end up where. Also, an interesting thing and I am guilty of this as well, that I keep forgetting about, and I mean this as no slight to Ricky Rubio. I think once he comes back and factors into this equation, maybe all of that, maybe some of our other issues that we keep talking about, inconsistency, minutes for Donovan Mitchell, shot selection for Darius Garland, some of those things kind of iron themselves out when you have another point guard that you're able to run out there with the second unit, that you're able to run out there for a significant portion of time. JB did say he probably wouldn't be looking at necessarily the minutes that we saw him playing last year. But I think that also factors into how this team kind of gels and moves forward.
I think, that is an excellent point from you, John, on Ricky Rubio getting back. And even if he doesn't play like the minutes he played, they're banking a lot on him being a factor still on this team, being important to this team, having a role on this team, offensively off the bench, where he can relieve some of that stress off of those starters and most notably Donovan Mitchell. So, I think that's an excellent point. You go through the standings, and when you think about it, like the way I view the East, I think right now is like, currently, as it sits today, I think there's obviously 2 elite teams. There's the Bucks and there's the Celtics. I think the Nets, if they play the way they're playing now, given the talent they have, they should probably find themselves in that conversation as one of the elite teams in the East. And I think it's those 3. Like those 3 are the creme de la creme of the Eastern Conference. And then the rest of it, I feel like, is kind of just up for grabs. Like the Cavaliers are in the mix. The 76ers, I know they have some injuries right now with James Harden, and I think Embiid's been dealing with some injuries at times too this year, and I think Maxi's hurt as well. So like they're dealing with some stuff, but like Yeah, they're up there, but I don't like fear that team. Like I think the Cavs can very well run with that team, especially when they have like Jared Allen and Evan Mobley in the paint there. The Knicks are in the conversation right now. The Pacers are kind of in that conversation. They're the current 7 seed. I'm out on the Heat. I just don't think the Heat are a very good team this year. They're older and they don't really have a roster that I think is built to compete. I think the Cavs are better than them. The Hawks are sort of struggling, but I do think when that team gets to the playoffs, they could be a threat. And the Raptors have seemed to have the Cavs number, but I think like on paper, the Cavs are a better team roster-wise than them. So yeah, I mean, you're basically saying if you throw the Nets into the elite conversation by season's end, you just want the Cavs to be the best of like that next group of teams. You just want them to be the top of like the others. You know what I mean? Like that next level group tier of teams. And if that means they, win a playoff series and then get bounced by one of these better, the Celtics, the Bucks, the Nets, or whatever in the second round, fine. I think that means you get valuable playoff experience for this young team. They end up being that, they can then use that going into the following year. But that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like I want them to be a top 4 team hosting a playoff series and be able to. Not that the season would be a failure if they end up as the 5-6 seed, whatever. But if for me, like that is a successful season where I can sit back and be like, all right, I feel really good about the way that this season went. And I feel like the progress is clearly being made. And then whatever comes after that, we can set standards for next year. Sure. But yeah, I think that's kind of how I view the East at this point as we get ready to sort of turn the calendar and get into January.
Kind of anxious to see how this team looks in regards to the Cavaliers against teams at home, right? Because when you look at some of their losses, 2 of those losses came to Milwaukee on the road.
Yeah.
2 of those losses came to Toronto on the road. And then you had a couple of losses obviously to the Kings in there as well. So there's 6 of their 11 losses. And I know that we're not going to see the Kings anytime soon again. But I think that when you're kind of looking at it on a loss by loss basis and you're kind of taking things there, like there's with regards to Toronto and Milwaukee, there's 4 of your 11 losses. So once you get them on your home floor, I'm anxious to see what that looks like. Because I mean, there are times when it's night and day. This team looks better when they're playing at Rocket Mortgage FieldHouse.
And I get that to an extent too. Like there's certain vibes playing at home. There's the home crowd. Sometimes it's just hard to win on the road. There's these slogs of like long road trips where it just becomes cumbersome and you're tired of all the travel and there's back to back. I get there's certain reasons. It is just weird to me though too that they struggle sometimes on the road because they're a top 10 team in defensive efficiency. And you would think of all the things like that is something that would travel. That is something that a team would be able to take with them. I get the offensive stuff, like you feed off that, and offensively sometimes you're just clicking more at home. But defensively, they've even had some duds on the road. And it's like, dude, for a team that emphasizes that and you're top 10 in defensive efficiency, why doesn't that traveling as well either? And I do think, and I think we saw it in the San Antonio game, I think there's times where this team just kind of goes into games thinking like, we're going to beat this team. It's fine. We can kind of cakewalk it. And it comes back to bite them as we saw in that game this week. So I hope after this long road trip, they take some of these road tests a little bit more seriously and they don't just look at it as like, well, the teams that have stars, like, yeah, we take them more seriously than the teams that don't. Because listen, it's the NBA, man. Like these teams are they can all get you on any given night. They're going to play hard. So I think that's one of those things too that JB is still sort of working through. I will say at that post-game press conference after that San Antonio loss he seemed like beside himself. He was like really angry. Like he was very short with his answers to questions. Sure. He did not seem happy with the way they played. And I think he was kind of picking up on the same thing I just said. Like sometimes his team just doesn't seem like they're focused for these road games against inferior teams. And that's unfortunate. They got to work that out.
Yeah, that's a good point too that you bring up, and something that they've kind of alluded to in some of their comments that I maybe haven't paid quite enough attention to. And I think that that's something that I've kind of noticed and maybe kind of put in the back of my head that like they just kind of tend to roll things out against certain teams.
Yeah.
But then there's other teams that they're able to get up against, and I don't want to see this team fall into a habit of trying to be able to flip that switch. But that's something that we should certainly pay attention to. I don't get a sense that JB gets particularly upset about a lot of things, but he wants that effort to be there consistently on a given night.
That's
you
the
mentioned
key.
that post-game press conference against San Antonio was something that stood out, and it also kind of stood out against I think it was the loss against the Kings. Like,
Yeah.
he was very short. I think
Yeah.
we talked to JB and 2 players after the game, and it was like 10 minutes and everybody was in and out of there. Like, you could tell that they were disgusted with that.
I think that's the key with JB is like, if they play hard, but they lose, he can live with that. If they go out and they just kind of think like we can go through the motions and beat this team, that's where you get those press conferences afterwards where you can tell he is just, it's like he's at a funeral. Like, he's just not happy at all. He's beside himself. He's upset. He's frustrated, and he doesn't really know how to answer questions. So yeah, I think you're right.
Certainly more focused on the process as opposed to the results, at least at this point of it. But the results so far have been pretty good for the Cleveland Cavaliers. 2 games tonight. Indiana Pacers coming to town this evening at Rocket Mortgage FieldHouse on a Friday night. Then you've got the Dallas Mavericks once again. Real quick thoughts as we wrap up. What you're hoping to see from the Wine and Gold this weekend, Spence?
Yeah, I mean, it's first games against an Eastern Conference foe that's obviously in the playoff picture. They're, I think I said, the 7 seed. So, you just hope you take care of business against them. Dallas, you know what their blueprint is. Everything basically runs through Luka. You already beat that team, so sort of showing the consistency that you can do it again. That one might be a little tougher, though, when you're coming off a back-to-back. Granted, sure. I know Dallas is now on a road trip, so maybe they're a little tired too. We'll have to see how it goes. But, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thought going into the games this weekend. And then overall with this stretch of games coming up, it's a good test against some of these teams once you start the Milwaukee. That 3-game stretch that you kind of highlighted, starting next Wednesday, Milwaukee, Toronto, Brooklyn. That's a key, I think, couple matchups that fans are going to want to keep their eye on just to see how they stack up with these teams, especially Toronto, who's already gotten them twice, obviously on the road, and you got to kind of get off the schneid. Same with Milwaukee. So I think all 3 of those games will kind of be a nice test barometer for you here at the end of the year.
It's a 7:30 tip-off on Friday night, 8 o'clock tip-off on Saturday night. You can watch head coach JB Bickerstaff's press conference live right here on the Cavs Insider YouTube page. For Spencer German, I'm John Rudder. Thanks for joining us on the Cavs Insider Podcast. We'll see you tonight from Rocket Mortgage FieldHouse as the Cavaliers take on the Pacers.